over and press it.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Lotus, where we talk about all things strange and unusual. And today we're mainly going to be focusing on Michael Roser. And the reason being is he's a former paranormal investigator. And we're going to be talking about paranormal investigations and the machines versus intuition when you go on these things. But Michael, how's it going, man?
I'm doing fantastic, guys. How about yourselves?
Great.
Good.
Wild, nice to have you here again.
As always.
Thank you.
As always. So, hey, real quick, I want to jump right to this question. Wolf Kid Werewolf Channel in the room, and he says, hopefully we can get Cryptids of Colorado soon. You know, here at Black Lotus, we have a Cryptids Across America series that we started to do, and we kind of just left that behind, especially since we started doing all these live things. But Wolf Kid, I responded to you, and just recently we talked to a man by the name of Kenney Irish for a podcast, and he wrote a book just recently, just published it, and it's called American Cryptids. And what he did is he focused on the most popular cryptids in each of the 50 states. And I've got the book on the way. It sounds very interesting. So yeah, definitely check that out over at Amazon. Apparently it's hovering around #1 and #2 in the cryptids section on Amazon. So definitely check that out. But so Michael, the first thing I want to ask here, because I've never been on a paranormal investigation, I would love to go on one, but I've never done it, is that, you know, a lot of paranormal investigators bring along a psychic, you know, along with all the equipment and that kind of stuff. But I've heard that a lot of paranormal investigators have issues with that, with having psychics on hand, that they seem to be more in the way than anything else. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's interesting. We've seen the advent of psychics being used on paranormal investigations increasing throughout the years, that this really was something that people were paying attention to. I think initially, and really at the core of what paranormal investigation is about, is the scientific approach, the use of certain measuring devices in order to corroborate what's being experienced, and then, of course, perhaps prove what it is or what it isn't. So, you know, when people brought in the psychic end, you know, perhaps this is something left over from an era long past, wherein this is the predominant way that people were communicating with those that passed over or the other side, you know, through the 1800s, early 1900s. There was some technology, okay, that we could cite here that went along the way of, you know, contacting the other side, again, via electronics, but predominantly people's interest and their introduction to this was through an intuitive medium or something along those lines. So to bring it back to our present day, where we're going on these investigations, and now I think we've learned a whole lot over the years, and with the different gadgets that have been created, not only by those teams that you know, but by people who are just interested in the field. They've really come up with some interesting ways to measure the environment. So in the end, I think that although whatever an intuitive or a psychic may pick up on an investigation, it's very hard to use that as any sort of solid evidence in the way of whatever you're trying to prove, whether it's paranormal or not. It's still subjective, you know, and definitely relative to that individual who may be experiencing something that someone standing next to them isn't. So,
right.
Maybe,
and I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, you know, to kind of answer your question here, the psychic's getting in the way, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, it's really, like you said, it's kind of a throwback to the way they used to do it. I mean, they used to have like seances and that kind of thing, you know, Ouija boards and that sort of thing. And, you know, when you're a modern day investigator, you want to be as close to scientific as possible with the measurements and that sort of thing. And the other thing too is that, honestly, I don't have a lot of faith in spiritual mediums. I think a lot of them are hoaxers. You know, I know that they do exist. I have a very good friend of mine. I don't know if I ever told you about this. I have a friend of mine in Florida. Her name is Anne Marie Ballog. And this woman is amazing. I mean, she knows things that she just shouldn't know. I mean, my wife had a reading from her. That's how we met. And she knew things about my wife's son who had died that she never would have known. It was really weird. But there's this connection that she and I have, and it's very strange, and it freaks me out a little bit because I'll be reading something and I wonder what Anne Marie would think about this. And I swear to God, not 10 minutes later, I'll get a message on Facebook. Hey, from her. And it says, hey, in regards to your question. And it's like, Jesus, witch, get out of my head.
It's synchronicity really at its best right there.
It's very strange. So I know that, these paranormal mediums do exist, and there are a lot of them that are legit, but I also think that there are many more that are not legit. They're just in it to make money, from the gullible.
Just to mention here, how many times have you gone through life and something strange has happened between you and a friend wherein he said, I'm giving you an example. I don't feel right about going down to the bar that, we had planned on going to, and come to find out the whole bar burns down and there, a few deaths, whatever the case is, you've missed that beat. These are a lot of one-offs that people have, and they kind of look at them and say, wow, that was really crazy. Do you remember the time that was it's really interesting that occurred. But to be consistent in the world of clairvoyance or psychic activity, that's a whole other side of the art, if you will. But we're all capable of, I think, interpreting some of these intuitions that come. For example, I'll give you one right now. So for those of you who don't know, I think many of you do, I had something going on in my home, and it kept me from seeing my kids for a good span of time, and we're still in that right now. Now, before this occurred, okay, because it happened overnight, and I'm leaving it at that, I had a weird feeling when I hugged my son goodbye. I had this feeling in myself that said, you won't see him for a little while. There's going to be a gap in time. And I'm interpreting this and sort of recognizing it as something I've heard before, but obviously being said about a different circumstance that I found to be relatively interesting. And I couldn't picture in my head what it might be that would keep my son from seeing me. Lo and behold, a couple days later, there was an instance. And sure enough, I'm now looking back and saying, okay, I can place that feeling. It must have been what was coming. Now, I didn't know what it was. I had no way to stop it. And this is something that you hear a lot when the average person has an intuition and decides to express it.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. I've had several instances like that, where, I'm traveling one way on a commute, and I usually take one route, and then instead I decide, I'm going to take a sightseeing tour. And I learned later there's a massive pileup on the freeway or something like that, So yeah, I mean, and I've heard a lot about that. A lot of people have had that sort of thing. But again, it goes back to what you were saying about consistency. It doesn't always happen. But I think if you listen to that little voice in your head, more often than not, it's trying to warn you. A lot of people would consider that like a guardian angel or something like that. I don't know if it's that, but I do think that it is your self-preservation talking to you,
Yeah.
So,
no, that's absolutely true. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But no, I was going to say, but, as I mentioned before, I mean, with modern day paranormal investigations, you want to remain as scientific as possible. And I understand the need for, say, tools like infrared cameras and EMF recorders. I get that. And I also understand that EMF recorders can be very fallible because it depends on, what's going on in the home electronically. There may be a broken fuse or something like that. And that's why the EMF recordings will go off the wall in a certain part of the house, or, that you get cold spots and that kind of thing. What I don't get are the EVPs or the ghost boxes. And the reason being is because it's, in my opinion, what you hear from the playbacks seems to be more of an audio pareidolia kind of thing. I mean, because what the average listener hears is, and then you got these paranormal investigators on television going, can't you hear what it's saying? It's saying, get the hell out of my room.
No, I agree with you on that.
Okay. So
I agree with that.
I don't get the importance that people have placed upon ghost boxes, and especially recently, I've noticed. I see it all over YouTube. You know.
Oh, even one of these excuse me, devices that have a built-in word bank, and I understand how it works, as limiting as that may be. I mean, personally, if I'm going to take an EVP, I'm going to go in with a regular, preferably an analog recorder, but I'll use digital as well. And I'm going to sit in the middle of the room like the old days and just have a conversation. We're not flipping through frequencies. We're not flipping through different bands. Therefore, we're not getting any sort of outside or background interference within that. Now, occasionally, these recorders will pick up a radio signal, but that's usually pretty identifiable by, the tempo of the person talking. You can tell it's a broadcast if you can't make it out distinctly, or you hear music, and then obviously that's the case. But EVPs are very interesting, and how to catch them in the most effective way is a really hotly debated topic, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Ralph and I both downloaded this thing from Google Play onto our phones once, and it was one of those word bank things. Mm-hmm. And, we're going, because we've had some weird stuff happen in this house. And so we went through the house and, we're trying to pick up, and it's picking up certain things that didn't make a lot of sense. Ralph came into the studio, and, he lives here with my wife and I, and he picked up a word that just simply said husband. And so that was kind of weird, kind of sent chills down my spine a little bit. But overall, from what I understand, those things that you can download onto your phone, because of the magnet or something like that in the phone itself, they're not to be relied upon.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think in some of my research, when some of these apps first came out, I think there was one called the Ghost app. I mean, I
think that's what it was called. Yeah.
Is that what it was? There were a lot of behind the scenes trickery in terms of that software to make it work the way that it does. I mean, it's a fun party trick, and I would sell it no more than that. I was going to say something. I can't remember what it was now. It's all right. It'll come back.
Yeah, we thought about taking one of those, taking that app down to one of the casinos on the strip. We wanted to actually take it to Caesars, because Caesars is horribly haunted, supposedly. And so we wanted to do that. But then I started reading more about this app, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to bother.
I know what I was going to say there. I'm not
going to pay for parking for that.
No, I mean, if you're going to go and do something like that, you'd want to take a standalone device like an Ovilus, I believe is called. This was a long time ago. I saw one of these things in action. Essentially, it is a unit that it holds a word bank and is influenced by environmental energies to whatever frequency. So therefore, again, the idea is that the spirit can come in and manipulate certain bands of frequency, thus choosing a particular word and then have a conversation. Now, the one and only time that I've seen this in person, I was actually kind of impressed. This was some time ago. I went out to Rutland State Prison Camp, and that is in Massachusetts, in Rutland there. But it's about a mile out into the woods. It's all ruins, but it's a very, very large property. Now, there's one place called the Root Cellar. Essentially, it's just that, built right into a hill where you can go in, and a lot of these paranormal investigation teams set up in this area. And then there's another place called the Tunnels. But long story short, I met a gentleman out there who I befriended sometime later. But when he first introduced himself, he also introduced an entire car full of equipment that he had brought with us for our little investigation. We were just out having fun this evening. So one of those units was an Ovilus, which he then pulled out and set down onto the ground in the root cellar. And I said, well, what do you do? He says, all you do is you just talk as if you were going to have an EVP, but expect a conversation if something decides to talk back. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've seen them on TV, and I've, seen them in different reviews, but never to the extent that, I really felt I need to pick one up myself. So as we're there, he's asking questions, who's here, the normal things. Next thing you hear, devil. And then you hear evil. And there were a couple other words that corresponded, which I don't remember, but those two stuck out to me very well. And I asked him, I was like, well, what's that all about? He's like, well, I mean, there is something very bad here on this property. And it's possible that it's not necessarily that entity itself communicating, but others that are here on a certain plane who are aware of his presence and know that that's what's here. And I said, wow, that's interesting. Now, again, long story short, this particular location became a very troublesome place for me later on, really confirming what he was saying and what this ovulus was picking up. Thought that was unique.
So what was going on in this root cellar to begin with? What made maybe I glazed over that?
No, I just wasn't thorough enough in explaining the property itself. So the Rutland State Prison Camp is an internment camp that had been used many different times in the latter part of the 20th century, I believe, and then, of course, into the 21st century. And many times there were different buildings that had different uses. For example, one of them was turned into a tuberculosis ward for children, and there were some infirmaries as well. That being said, it wasn't an awful place to be, and there were a lot of different immigrants that would come in, petty crimes, drunk in public, you're there for a week. But they did have isolation booths, which are still standing partially today. And I'll tell you, if I was ever locked in one of those things, man, with literally 5-6 feet in front and back of you, it's just so claustrophobic. But yeah, the property itself is really active in terms of spirit. And I've been there so many times up to the time I had an issue that, I'd say that probably 25-30% of the time I was getting activity that I was able to document. The other 75% I was not. But that being said, there was a group of kids or people, I don't know who it was exactly, who went down to the tunnel area in this place, and they were playing around with some black magic, and they called up something that they either couldn't put back or they just didn't put back because they didn't know what they were doing. And this was a non-human entity that was very ancient, and I think that was what was stalking the property, literally feeding off energy and holding whatever else was there as sort of hostage in a sense, energetically.
It goes back to just stupid people. Like for instance, these kids you were talking about that called up something, and then didn't put away their toy, basically. And there's so many people who are very inexperienced with the supernatural or preternatural, whatever. They don't know what they're doing, and here they are playing with something very dangerous. I've always been, Ralph he doesn't like Ouija boards. I don't mind Ouija boards because I think it's really no more harmful than a tarot deck, but you need to know how to use it, and a lot of these people, they don't bother learning about this stuff. They just go, ooh, let's contact a spirit, and you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're calling up. And I think that's ridiculous. But anyway, Ralph, where are you on this?
Which part?
Which part? Yeah. Well, specifically about calling up spirits and that sort of thing.
With the word boxes and stuff, or
with like Ouija boards or divination.
With Ouija boards, I don't like Ouija boards, as we know.
But they're so pretty.
Yeah, they are actually. But
Planjette's cool.
I think we're talking about the voice machines and the EVPs and stuff like that. I'm not big on those either. It's just static.
Yeah,
most of the time. It might be true in a couple of cases. I don't know, but I think most of the time it's just static.
I've heard some of them that are pretty clear, as to what they're saying. But like I said, most of it is just static, and it's really up for interpretation. And my opinion is that they have no place in a paranormal investigation because, as I said, you want to remain as scientifically accurate as possible. I mean, your whole purpose for being on site is to get some proof behind the paranormal, and that I don't think those things offer much proof at all. But and equally, I don't think that people with psychic intuition have much of a place on these pseudoscientific investigations.
I think they do. I think that they might be helpful in some ways if they're real.
But there's no proof. I mean, as I said, you're trying to get some proof of the paranormal.
Scientifically not.
And all of it remains objective on this kind of thing. But again, I mean, with like EMF recorders or infrared cameras, cameras with night vision, I mean, I think that those are important, most definitely, and bring back as much data as you can. But I mean, Wild, you know that. I mean, when you're out in the field, that's your whole purpose, is to get as much data as you possibly can and bring it back to the lab, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And something that, oh, first of all, sorry about earlier. I had a technical difficulty. I didn't want to interrupt. So
Oh, no
that's
problem.
what happened earlier. So yeah, I have a lot to say about what you guys have been saying. So I think I'll answer my bigger picture for this episode, and then I'll talk about details. So my big picture for the episode is that I've come to think that intuition does have a big role to play in paranormal research, and conversely, it already has a lot to do with non-paranormal research. Having done my own projects, started projects, I know that intuition is like super big. I rely on it heavily. Just the feelings I get to what kind of project to start, to when to start. And
Like
I
a
don't think
hunch.
it's just me. I think a lot of scientists. Yeah, strong hunches. We definitely rely on them. So it's already being done in academic research. So that's my bigger picture. And then some examples are, it's talking about devices. I love devices, especially biological or research devices. So I love a good ruler. I know it sounds weird, but a good microscope, electron microscope. I love a good GPS unit with Russian satellites. I love all the gear. So I'm really interested by paranormal gear. I'm like, I love gear. Let's see how it works. So very recently, I found out about 2 alleged paranormal devices. Okay. And they seem interesting to me. I haven't vetted them. Even if they're not real, the ideas behind them are still very interesting to me. So I'll talk about these 2 devices. So what I've realized is that these devices, they use science, heavy, like raw data, like you said, science, but you have to couple it with a little of intuition, or someone who has like good intuition skills. Like, so here's the thing about that. I'll go off on that. What you really need is someone who is a psychic. But what does that even mean? I think a psychic is just someone who can meditate really well. And I think everybody has that ability. So you don't necessarily need a psychic, but I think there are a few of them. There's a lot of frauds, but I think there are some individuals that are real psychics, but really all they could do is meditate really well. And I think that gives you some kind of power. But you could do it, Damien, and you could do it, Ralph. You could be your own psychic if you just practice meditation. So what I've noticed is that a lot of these devices.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Is it really intuition? Or are they? Is it more educated guesses?
There's a difference. They're very similar, and the only difference is the outcome, basically. But you're very right. I mean, that's a good point. It's hard to tell if the only difference is the outcome. Is it just a lucky guess? Is it just a guess, or is it something real? The outcome will tell you. If it's consistently right. But I get what you're saying. It gets really cloudy really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of that old TV series from back in the 70s, Columbo, where he turns to his boss and says, "Chief, I don't know, I just got a hunch." I mean, and so, but that's more of an educated guess than I think what we're talking about. This is more just listening to your intuition.
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's sometimes for me personally, when I'm, like I said, I'm doing a science project, I do feel something that is, I guess, you know what? Maybe it's subconscious is what I'm trying to say. Maybe it's a subconscious thing. Like perhaps it is just an educated guess, but the important part to me is that it's very subconscious. I'm not thinking about it actively. Perhaps that's what differentiates it from an educated guess.
I think you're right about that. I think if somebody was walking around saying that they were clairvoyant or a psychic, that has some implication that they have control over that craft. Whereas you and I might, again, be doing this more subconsciously or as an observer rather than an active participant. Well said, Wild Trees.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think there's levels to it, and I do think a lot of it has to do with meditating. Like if you want to get really good at these skills, you just have to start meditating really well.
But open your mind.
Let me tell you about one device. Okay, so one of the devices, I saw a documentary for it like 2 days ago. I'll put the link in the comments. But it's this documentary. It was shot in the 70s. And basically what it says is these scientists invented a device to talk to the dead. And it took like decades to develop. And then it did use a lot of like instrumentation and whatever. And, but one of the key ingredients was you needed someone who was like good at these skills to operate the device. That's like the missing piece, But they played clips of someone talking. So they said that one of the creators of the device died randomly one day, and then you could hear the voice recorded call. So it is like one of these EMP things, but it sounds a lot clearer. So, like I said, even if this idea is bullshit, which it may not be, I like the ideas behind it, that you could use technology, but you need to slit in the human element. You need a human component to get a little more information. But
you know what,
look,
I think,
Damien, I think you have to use both. I was going to say, you have to use both. You do have to have scientific data, and scientific data has to be your number one thing. Yeah, I was going to say science has to be your number one thing, and all this intuition stuff, you could add it in later if it works. But if it doesn't, you have to have all that data. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, I know there's a lag here. Sorry. I was just going to say that doesn't sound very crazy to me. In fact, I feel like that's probably where we're going with a lot of technology integration for the mechanical and the biological. But again, why this seems familiar is because that's exactly what they were doing with the Montauk chair. It wasn't just anybody who could sit in that chair. It had to be a highly trained psychic or clairvoyant that had already undergone rigorous training to do something like that. But once that was the case, that was exactly what it was. It was the merging of mechanical and biological. So that's interesting to hear. Do you have a name for this device by any chance? Do you know what it is?
No, like I said, I'll put the clip right after this episode on there, and you can watch the whole documentary about it.
Cool.
Just one other device I'll tell you real fast. It reminds me of this. This is a device that anybody can use. It doesn't cost a lot of money. So basically, I'll have to put a link to it later because I don't remember. So this is what you do. Let's say you want something to happen. Like this one guy, there's a YouTube video, he used this machine. This machine basically lets you alter reality however you want to. So this one guy, he just had termites in his house and he didn't want them anymore. So he's like, let me use this magical machine. So all you do is you print out this paper and it's a diagram, like a sketch for a machine, you know, and you could build it, but you don't even need to build it. You just lay out the paper with the sketch. And there's one area on the paper that's like a dial and you turn it. And there's another piece on the paper, this sounds weird, and you put your target there. So all this guy did to get rid of his termites, and like I said, this could be bullshit. Even if it is bullshit, I think the ideas are interesting behind it. So this guy wanted to get rid of his termites. So he printed out this machine. On the target circle, he just put a picture of a termite. He printed out a picture of a termite. Then he concentrated, this is the meditation part, and then he turned down the dial, like saying low, like I want to get rid of these termites. And apparently you could use this for anything to affect your affect anything. I guess if you could do it to get rich, anything you could imagine. So that's interesting. I would be interested in trying something like that. But that's just another example of using your meditation with some kind of machine or something to get something out of it.
And I wonder if it's a connection to the other side somehow. Lee Bodge in the room asked about dowsing rods, and you know I've always been kind of on the fence with that. I think they're easily manipulated, but I think somebody who is seriously trying to use these things, you know, for whatever reason, I think that they do actually work, you know, but yeah.
Dowsing rods are interesting because it's like very easy to tell whether you have results or not, you know, and it doesn't sound like expensive, you know. So if someone's dowsing, all it is a stick, and you could easily tell, like, if it's not working, just be like, okay, I'm done with dowsing. But it's very, you know what I mean? Like either it works or it doesn't. Either you find what you want or you don't.
Well, and like you say, it's a very inexpensive tool to use. And I think a lot of people want to get into paranormal investigation, and then they start looking into the tools and they go, you know, maybe I'll just bring along a psychic instead, because this stuff, I mean, if it's any good, it's expensive. Like that one thing you were talking about, Michael, it was the EVP thing that you said was pretty good.
Obvious.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that thing was very expensive, you know, but, you know, and then you get these special cameras that have infrared vision, you know, night vision. And I know those are expensive. Those are crazy expensive. So I think it puts off people that really are interested in getting into paranormal investigation. And like I said, they instead opt for the psychic because the psychic's cheaper.
Well, you know how funny though that we know that. Okay, thank you. I'll let you have the next one, Michael. Thank you. I was going to say, what's interesting is that we know for paranormal research, me and Damien and Ralph were just talking about this. We know that for paranormal research, for UFO research, having really good equipment really does help and will really make a difference. Because there's this guy called like UFOs over Las Vegas or whatever. The point is that if you get good enough cameras that are available today, they're very expensive, probably thousands of dollars. But if you get good enough cameras, you will film really high quality UFOs. It's just a fact. You will film them. So it's like we know that we could push our equipment to a point to get some kind of results out of UFOs or paranormal or cryptids or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, Michael, you were going to say something?
Yes. It's really interesting to see how polarized people are when it comes to paranormal investigation. For instance, somebody who is sensitive or believes they have high intuition can walk into a place and be convicted of whether it's, has a presence or it doesn't. Wherein, the skeptic paranormal investigator who's working from the scientific side needs that outside confirmation from devices and machines. I think it's a very interesting dynamic because I believe that both do actually have validity. As I mentioned before, I don't know if psychic activity and people that can do this sort of thing have a place in the expression of what we find in a scientific regard, again, because we can't necessarily measure it, but it doesn't necessarily make it less valid. There have been plenty of times that psychics have come along to certain locations and picked up much more in the way of the history, the information about who might be there than any of the devices have. And there have been obviously the converse experience where the devices pick up more than the psychics do. So it's really interesting. And I think, again, we come back to that word consistency on both ends. It's not just the psychics, it's also the electronics that we're using.
Yeah. But again, I mean, DarkHour Paranormal started off as a paranormal investigative team. That's correct, right?
Yes.
You okay, Wild?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I mean, obviously, you had some pretty good equipment with you. So do me a favor, walk me through what you would do on a typical investigation from the time you get there.
I'll have to generalize a little bit because every location was different depending on who we had with us, what equipment was available at the time, and the location itself. For example, when we went to the Concord Colonial Inn in Concord, Massachusetts, very haunted old establishment, it was most of the activity was concentrated to this one particular room, and yet there was still reports of other activity that happened within the inn itself. So we were in a particular circumstance where the teller allowed us to have access to see other parts of the hotel or wander at our discretion, which was really nice. But we were focused on this one particular room. So as soon as we got there, we set up all of our computers, any cameras or still shots that we were going to be taking. Back then, we were still using analog film as well as digital just to see the different effect. And so then at that point, we'd sit down and over coffee, we would talk about what the night ahead might entail. So we'd break it off into different blocks, and perhaps if, let's say, there were 3 locations in the inn that we wanted to focus on, we'd say, okay, a couple hours, we're going to focus on here. You'll sit there. I'll be up in another place, and we're going to report back to each other via walkie-talkie, cell phone, whatever the case may be, and just see how things go. Then maybe we'll switch, or we'll sit together and see if we experience something. That actually did happen there. Well, my partner at the time and I were sitting in 2 separate chairs. We both experienced something come right through us. And for this person that had been with me, it was the first time he'd ever experienced anything like that, wherein I recognized it immediately that was what it was. But that being said, at that point, when you're starting to feel, because a lot of times you'll start to feel something before you see it, hear it, or otherwise, you're now waving the camera around wildly, trying to get the shot, seeing what it is that is in the room, hoping that you'll get something. Of course, we had night vision. Infrared cameras were they were affordable to what it was, at least in the way of adapters and so forth. So we had several of those that we were using. And of course, we had just regular cameras going too. I mean, this was, this was a good 12, 13 years ago. So the technology was not exactly what it is today. But that being said, that's what we would do. I mean, there was a point of time where we decided we were going to both lay on the bed. So he's on my left, I'm on the right. And we're just sitting there. And honestly, we're just feeling. We're feeling the environment. Maybe we'll ask questions. Sure. Absolutely. That sometimes elicits a little bit of a response, but more often than not, I was feeling something. I'll give you a quick example too. In that room, it was a room where soldiers who were wounded in battle were put off to the side in the promise that they were going to be healed, but they were put there because they were already too far gone. So that's the reality of what that room was for many years. In one particular spot, it was probably the size of a Frisbee, maybe a little bit bigger. I could walk through this and I would all of a sudden feel ill, completely drained of energy, just feel like I'm going to throw up. But I'd walk 1.5 feet in front of me and I'd feel fine again. And I noticed this when I first got into the room, and I mentioned it to my partner at the time. I said, "Can you feel this?" And he walked through it. He said he felt a little strange, but it was no reaction as well, as intense as mine was. And yet that was a focus of study that night. And we didn't come to any conclusion other than something in that particular area, that one little space was just not right. You could walk through it and you could feel it.
But I think that happens too, more often than not, and it allows for the debunkers to just have a field day, because it's not something that you have been able to measure necessarily.
Right.
There's no science behind it.
Were you ever able to record anything with the equipment you had, such as movement or something falling from a shelf or anything like that?
I never got anything physical, save for one instance, which I'm hesitant to talk about because it probably shouldn't have happened, but I'll see if I can express this in another roundabout way.
Right.
So we were in a location where we were instructed not to touch anything, although we could, very well walk around and videotape. In this particular location, there was a lot of antiques, and we stumbled upon a clock. And I was filming the clock as we were walking through the room, and my partner goes, "Oh, look. Oh, I bet that door," it said something to the effect, "I bet the door swings open," or something like that. And on video, I had this, he went up and he went to touch the knob. And before he even touched the knob, the entire glass plate flipped out and shattered on the floor.
Ooh.
So this was weird. I mean, we did get it on film, for what it's worth. We had it on a mini disc, and I think I still have that. But yeah, he didn't actually touch it, and yet this thing flew out. Now, obviously, there was really one of two choices here. We could either go and let our hosts know that we had really messed up, and we'd probably be truncated for the rest of the evening, or we could sweep it up and pretend like nothing happened. But we chose the latter and got the hell out of there. But maybe at that time it wasn't the best of choices. But that being said, I don't know what we could have really said, because nobody actually touched anything. And that's the honest to God truth. Yeah. But in terms of movement and so forth on physical objects, it was very limited. There were a couple occasions that I did catch some wisped figures that looked very anomalous in terms of energy. I had many orbs on film, things of that nature.
Huh. Wow. That's interesting. So yeah, I find it to be a fascinating subject, because, like I said, I've always wanted to go on a paranormal investigation, and I've never really had the opportunity. In a way, it kind of scares the hell out of me, and I think that's one of the reasons I want to do it.
You don't want to take something home with you?
Yeah, and I mentioned Kenney Irish recently, and he's a Bigfoot. Or a cryptid investigator, I should say, not just Bigfoot. And I told him the same thing. I've always wanted to go on an investigation, but I'm not a survivalist by any means. And so I'm kind of terrified of being out in the middle of the woods with no one around except for a 8-foot tall menace. And so that kind of scares the hell out of me. And equally, paranormal investigation kind of frightens me, because, you're messing with things that you're not sure what you're messing with.
That's true. But keep this in mind too. Think of it this way. How many, coming back to our original topic here, how many paranormal investigations begin or are, aflame because somebody had an intuition being in the house that they're in? So the housewife is at home washing dishes and something's rubbing up against her hair. She's hearing voices in other rooms where there are no people, things of this nature, or gets this really heavy feeling of dread when she walks into a particular room. So these are all intuitive interpretations that are strong enough for somebody to say, "Hey, I need to call somebody in here to perhaps measure this scientifically and see if we can find out what's going on. Now, here's the question: how much is intuition, and how much is it that our body is feeling that we're just not aware that we can really feel on a daily basis? For example, EMF. Okay, you can feel sick in a high EMF field, and you can attribute it and think that it's something paranormal because it looks similar to it in the way that things have been reported, and yet it's something very measurable and scientific. It's
Right.
EMF.
Yeah, I've talked to other paranormal investigators, and they have told me that more often than not, the cases are brought to their attention by the wife in the house. And generally speaking, the husband is irritated by the presence of these paranormal investigators. He's like, it's just all a bunch of hocus pocus, but this brings me to the question of intuition. Do you think women are more intuitive than men? And that's why they're reported to the paranormal investigators by the women more often than not.
I'm going to answer shortly, and then I want to hear Wild Tree's thoughts on this. I'm going to say that the feminine energy is more intuitive. So whether a man may embody a good portion of feminine energy, regardless of sexuality or anything like that, but just the femininity, he might be more sensitive. And, I'm definitely an example of that. I have a good balance of the masculine and the feminine, but I definitely have a good, healthy relationship with my feminine side, so to speak, and that is the intuition and the right brain. Wild Trees, what do you think, man?
But what specifically? Maybe you should.
Do you think?
You ask me
Do you
a question,
think
I'll
that?
gladly answer it.
Do you think that women are more intuitive than men?
Yeah. I think that could very much well be true. And that makes me that's gotten me thinking this whole night while we've been talking about, like, what is intuition? What do we mean by intuition? I think it's 100% possible that intuition is all. Oh man, you were just talking about it. I think it could all just be explainable scientifically. Because here's the thing. We're like floating in an ocean of information, whether that's light or smells or infrared, radio waves. I mean, all around us, there's so much information, and a lot of it's useful to us and can help us decide what to do in the future. I mean, we use that because we can see the weather. We feel the weather's hot, so we decide what to do with our future. Part of me thinks that some people, and I think most of it is subconscious, their body is just organizing all that information they're getting in a better way, even like smells or whatever. And then they just get an end result, which is like, I feel like I should do this, or I feel like I should do that. And so it could be that, any of us can train ourselves to get this intuition, but it's all these subconscious, like, interpretations of the outside world. And it could be that women, just the way they act in our society, just the way they are biologically, they just receive that information better. Or, because I guess the two things that would affect this intuition would be how well you could perceive the information. So how well your vision is, how well your smell is, how well your taste is. And then the other thing is, like, I guess how actively you're putting it all together.
Well, biologically speaking,
think, yeah.
Wild, do you think it would have something to do with a lack of testosterone in women?
Testosterone is a very important hormone, and it does modify the body physically. So because of testosterone, a male body is physically different than a female body. So I have to say yes. I mean, it could play a role. We'd have to follow it to its logical conclusion and go all the way to the bottom. But good.
I believe there is a science behind all of this, and I believe it will boil down to vibration and frequency that can be measured at some point. And I believe that the paranormal and the other side, the way that we look at it, will also have quantification at a certain point. That being said, will any of us be alive to see it? I really don't know. I think we're kind of far off in our discovery of that sort of thing. But I really have a feeling I see a lot of connections between the two. I see a lot of correlation in respect to each of the existence of the left brain interpretation of the paranormal and intuition versus the right brain interpretation. There are some consistencies that are very hard to dismiss when looking at these things, and especially when it comes to paranormal investigation.
Do you think, Michael, that we'll ever get to the point where we have extremely accurate equipment for paranormal investigations? I mean, like you were mentioning, back when you did it, you had equipment that's now outdated. I mean, we've really come a long way. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where, we'll have equipment that is, it's undeniable evidence?
I'd have to say yes at some point, but I think we're going to see more of what Wild Trees was mentioning in terms of the integration between the electrical and the organic. I think that I think there's going to be a merging there at some point, because if both sides are valid in terms of interpretation, but again, just interpreted much differently, and yet we come to the same conclusion: there's either a haunting or there isn't. Eventually there will be some merging, in my opinion, of those technologies and our own intuition. I really think it's where we're headed. I mean, you look at what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink and what his end goal is.
I was going to bring that up, that, with the advances like that, it's got to happen eventually.
Yeah. And there's going to be developments where they're going to be able to isolate certain areas of the brain that haven't had certain consciousness run through them in the way that we've wired ourselves now, and they're going to be able to electrically or mechanically stimulate those areas to create what appears to be sort of a superhuman in terms of intelligence and so forth. I think Neuralink already purports some of this intelligence increase in some people, however varied it may be. But we're going to see more extreme examples of that. I believe in our lifetime we'll see things like that developing.
Yeah, that Neuralink thing freaks me out a little bit. I mean, talk about Big Brother 1984 and thought police and that sort of thing. But yeah, it kind of freaks me out.
God, yeah.
Hey, so I personally, I think one of the most accurate devices out there for paranormal investigations is the EMF recorder. The electromagnetic frequency. I can't remember the name of it actually, but it's recording differences in certain areas of the house where things have happened, or where, you're in an area where it gets cold and then you're getting a weird frequency on the EMF. And then you find out that there's some electronics behind the wall that that's causing. Why would these electronics, or like a bad fuse or something like that, cause it to get cold in that spot?
See, maybe Wild Trees, you might have a better guess at this than I do. Because to me, they may be very separate phenomenons.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I could expand on this. So yeah. So what you're talking about is the device you're talking about is called an electromagnetic frequency detector, so an EMF detector. And so what is the electromagnetic field? What is it? Well, it's a field that surrounds the entire planet. So the planet itself gives off an electromagnetic field. Humans and living things have an electromagnetic signature. They give it off and we can detect it. And electronics are a big one. They give off the electromagnetic field. And like even a hot window will give it off. So basically everything does give off an electromagnetic field. Okay. The thinking behind using it in paranormal research is that what you're trying to detect is unusually high spikes in the electromagnetic field. And I think it's just because the people are making a correlation that if you see an electromagnetic field very high, there must be something making it high. And then the other correlation is that that's probably a paranormal thing. So I think that's why they're used. And just from just from what I mentioned, it could be useful. It could, because I feel like if I'm just thinking about UFO, for instance, I'm thinking if I point that thing near one of its craft, it'll probably have a really high electromagnetic field. It's just something that tells me about it. So yeah, that's what their thinking is, but there's no real framework. That's a problem. Nobody's really done a really good framework as to why this is good for ghosts, or why is it good for paranormal things. Really, all they have done is they've taken something and just stuck it onto paranormal. As far as my understanding is, as far as what I'm understanding is. But yeah, so if there's a cold spot in an area, let's say, and you put the electromagnetic field detector on it, and there is a big spike, well then, yeah, the next thing would be to find out if there's a correlation between the two. So first, what I would do is I would find the cause of the electromagnetic field. So I'd be like, is there an outlet? Is it an electrical outlet? Is there an electrical wire underneath? Is there a lot of sun coming in? And if you rule out everything there, the prosaic things, then perhaps there is a paranormal thing causing the cold spot. Hopefully that answers your question.
Does that jive with your thoughts, Michael?
In a sense, I think the majority of time that I've ever been in a situation where I needed to use an EMF reader, if the only activity that I was picking up in that area was EMF, that was usually kind of where it stopped for me. If I didn't find the source of what it was, usually when you find a spike like that, it's in conjunction with something else like cold spot or feelings of dread or something like that. So there's always, as soon as you identify that there is a spike in that particular area, you're then going to look for something else to corroborate that it might be supernatural or otherwise.
I just have to think that a lot of the times you're just picking up wires in the house and normal electric static.
That's easy enough to figure out as you're going through, depending on the age of the house. The older the house is, the more prone they are to something like that. And more often than not, you can detect the physical location of where those wires are in the wall, because that EMF will just spike very consistently within a certain space where you can actually draw, where these wires or whatever else is interfering. It's a question as to why supernatural may be using EMF as opposed to any other sort of frequency. So until we answer that question, it's always going to be a question of whether or not we have something supernatural, or if there's something else that we're just not able to identify that we're measuring.
I think a really interesting point that you were mentioning, Damien, earlier, is that I wholeheartedly believe that scientists should be working toward developing a device that lets us observe the paranormal clearly and in terms that we can understand. That would be a breakthrough moment, and that's what happened before with the microscope. The microscope was a breakthrough physical piece of equipment because it clearly let us see the micro world in ways that we could understand. The telescope was the same thing. It was a breakthrough device. It clearly let us look at the stars and the planets in a way that we can interpret, and it changed the way we see the world. So we definitely need a device that will do that for the paranormal. It has to be easy to use, and just anybody can use it. I feel like I haven't put it on my list of to-do list because I have no idea where I'd start, and that sounds super complicated. Perhaps a team of scientists can get together, probably physicists mostly, maybe chemists, but I'm not sure if a biologist has really developed something like that. This biologist probably couldn't. But we definitely need that device.
Well, yeah, and we've mentioned this before, that science isn't taking a very hard look at the paranormal. No. There are scientists out there like you. There are scientists out there like you who are afraid to voice their opinion about the paranormal, and because it could be career ending. But yeah, I definitely agree. Science needs to get past this old way of thinking and open their minds to the possibility of the paranormal and investigate it a little bit more, because, otherwise, how are we supposed to progress? If we're stuck in our old ways with science, where scientists are going, well, we've been doing this way forever and it seems to work. And then when somebody like you comes along and says, yeah, but they're suddenly shunned by the scientific community. It's in my opinion, that's the antithesis of science, but yeah.
That's exactly pretty much what I said when I was reviewing the interview with Avi Loeb and Jaime Maussan, wherein Avi is obviously from academia, and he talked quite extensively about people's fear to divulge any sort of right angle from what we're usually steering on. It's the resistance to change, and because the change is so enormous and implies so much, it's more comfortable for people to kind of sit in that one pocket they always have. Although, the thing is here, the contradictions, that they're lying to themselves and they know that. So, at some point you have to really kind of look at yourself and what your position is, and perhaps consider what you're here to do in respect to making this world a better place or change.
Yeah, absolutely. I
could get a little.
Did I hear you correctly saying that you got to interview Jaime Maussan?
No, I did not interview him myself. He's actually part of the third phase of Moon Panel with us, but he had an interview with Avi Loeb, which is fantastic. You guys should check that out. Absolutely incredible. It was all about Oumuamua.
we talked yesterday. We had an interview with Darcy Weir, the filmmaker Darcy Weir, and he just put out a new documentary about crop circles, and along with Gary King, and both of them have worked very closely with Jaime Maussan, and I'd love to talk to that guy. I tell you what, he's a pretty interesting guy. But yeah. By the way, listeners or viewers, our podcast Paranormal News Network with that interview with Gary King and Darcy Weir will be uploaded this coming Wednesday. So definitely check that out at Paranormal News Network on PodBean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. So yeah, as well. I think we're on Stitcher too, but I'm very opposed to iTunes. I don't like iTunes at all. They're really a pain in the ass. So.
I don't use anything Apple based. I don't know if you can get iTunes on Windows now, but that's what it used to be. You could only do on Mac.
You can, but it's kind of a pain. I mean, you have to have an Apple ID and all that. And where it comes to having a podcast with them, I mean, you got to jump through hoops with them. I mean, they're just stupid. So I just like, I don't want to deep deal with these people, you know. But anyway, I think we're going to get out of here. Wild, I think you were about to say something, though, before I rudely interrupted you.
I'll just say, oh, it's okay. So yeah, I was going to say, okay, just to make one little point, that something to ponder. So it's really hard in our society for the paranormal to be taken seriously. So my thought is that part of this could be on purpose, and it could be caused by the paranormal itself. The paranormal could study humanity and realize that we do not deal well with the bizarre and the absurd. And so the paranormal may be saying, let us act bizarre and absurd, because that'll keep them from talking about us. That'll keep our profile low.
That's a good point. Yeah, definitely.
It's possible.
Ralph, do you have anything you want to add here?
No, not really. I just found this to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Likewise.
Michael, thank you for bringing up this topic.
Oh, my pleasure.
As soon as you said that, because our guest bagged out this week. He'll be on with us next week. But I asked the guys, you have any idea what we can do as a topic? And Michael brought this up, and I about jumped out of the chair and went, yes, I've been wanting to do something like this, So thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. My pleasure. It's been an awesome conversation.
Yeah,
good job, Michael. I agree too.
Hey, viewers, thanks a lot for watching. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the little bell. Visit our websites in the description. Michael has a Dark Hour Paranormal live here on YouTube. Ralph and I have BlackLotusProductions.net. Where we have all of our past videos as well as our podcast there. And you can also find out about upcoming shows and that kind of thing. And then Wild has an interesting page over at Facebook. So definitely check that out. And speaking of Facebook, we also have a group over at Facebook called Black Lotus Discussion Group. And there, we're not the typical paranormal group there where we share, ridiculous memes or cartoons and that kind of thing. We actually have conversations about this stuff. I mean, the people there, for the most part, are serious about this stuff. But the nice thing is we rarely have a problem with trolls or debunkers or that kind of thing. I mean, people are there to learn about the paranormal, everything under the big paranormal umbrella. So definitely check that out. So until next time.
I'll say one thing.
Yes, go ahead.
I'll say, I think just one more thing. I think everybody should add a comment to this video, comment on it. And I think you should answer the question, when has intuition helped you out? And I'll put that question in the comments. So
what's your experience with intuition? Do you have one? That's a great thought, Wild Trees.
It's a good idea. Yeah, most definitely. Because more often than not, we don't hear back from the people that come and visit us, when we do these live conversations. And, it's really hard to interact. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we created that Black Lotus discussion group, is so we could get people to interact with us. And that seemed to work pretty well. But yeah, definitely on the video itself, in the comments, leave a comment and tell us, what's been your experience and what do you think about the difference between machines, paranormal investigative machines, as opposed to the intuition, and do you think that they integrate well with each other? So, but anyway, until next time, folks, keep thinking and question everything.